Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to talk about the intentional leak that Creative Assembly left in the game files regarding the Dogs of War as a potential future DLC. We spoke about that yesterday in terms of the leak in general, but I've not been able to stop thinking about it, I'll be very honest with you, and what I want to do in this video is talk about the Dogs of War, how they should be implemented in terms as a DLC to give Creative Assembly a little bit of a nudge in the right direction. I honestly have been waiting for the Dogs of War for a long time now. I'll be honest with you, the recent happenings with the whole Shadows of Change DLC has got me kind of worried. So if Creative Assembly want that redemption arc, well, yeah, they're going to have to start putting in the dev work. The managers are going to have to allow the devs to do their thing. Now, obviously, I don't claim to know better than the managers or the devs or anything, but I know Warhammer Fantasy better than most, and this is how the Dogs of War need to be implemented in an effort to not only be worth its cash if the DLC is going to cost around 25 euros or more, as that looks like it's going to be the standard pricing for DLCs in the future. I would say that price isn't really much of a problem. I've stated this in many videos. The only thing is that the value of the goods needs to be worth that price. But anyways, let's begin because I feel like this is going to be a rather long video, and yeah, I've been thinking about this literally non-fricking stop. Before anything, a little bit of context. The Dogs of War are a faction of mercenaries, essentially. So these units are from pretty much every race. You could find High Elves, Dark Elves, Orcs, Undead, all of them basically serving their services for some cash. However, units did actually exist as a basic unit, which could have been considered units from ARABY, ESTALIA, or even TILEA, the Border Princes. The main way that you would represent these units is they had their own rule, is you would get something else and paint it a different color or even kitbash it. This was back in the day when Games Workshop would supply loads of rules but actually not release any models. There were also cases that yes, those units would be represented, but through the actual regiments of renown within the Dogs of War. So yeah, the Dogs of War are usually seen throughout the territories of ESTALIA, TILEA, ARABY, and the Border Princes, and this is where it's centralized in terms of lore. The Dogs of War book focused very heavily on TILEA, actually more than anything else. But the thing is that they could easily be done as their own factions and separated into their own nations too, as we know that they've been getting lore every now and then through Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and the fact is that, well, Games Workshop have heavily hinted this for Warhammer the Old World. I'm not going to be talking about Warhammer the Old World too much, but it's more of the case of, if it's happening the same way as, well, Kislev and Cafe. They didn't have armies on the tabletop, but they do, or they will, better yet said, in Warhammer the Old World when they eventually release. That means new aesthetics, new looks, new, well, everything, and they could easily be done as smaller factions just to kind of bring a little bit of variety to everything. And there is a perfect DLC format to do this that will not implement one race, but 3 races. This would be the Champions of Chaos format, which I've really been calling Culture Packs. There's no official name apparently, but yeah, what this did is flesh out the Warriors of Chaos and turn them into its own thing. Right now you have a army of Chaos Warriors of Khorne, Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh with their own unique styling. Some of them look better than others, let's be very honest, but they've all got their unique voice acting too. You can see them devote themselves to Valkyr, Azazel, Festus, and so on. This is something which can be done well. The Reskin DLC, as it was called, could actually benefit these factions and turn ESTALIA, TILEA, and ARABY into its own thing. A lot of work was actually put onto the Champions of Chaos DLC, which is why I find it so hilarious that the Shadows of Change DLC costs more. So why not use that format again to create new races? Hear me out. I know a lot of people are going to get angry, but there's still unique models that could come into play. The most important thing is obviously these are human nations, which means that humans themselves will have the same animations, will have the same rigs. A lot of stuff can be reused, and all you have to do is reskin the troops to make them look like Tileans, Estalians, and Arabians. It's exactly what happened with the Champions of Chaos DLC, so why not do that again? Why not use that format to bring in a bunch of minor factions, make them their own thing, and give people a lot more stuff to play around with? I hope you guys are still following me here, because there's a few things that we need to discuss. The first thing is going to make people angry, but trust me, I believe I can justify it. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is basically the price. I think it's very important that we talk about this. It's a race pack. Race packs have been costing around 25 euros. That's the most recent pricing with the Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs DLC. I would say if it's done in the way that I'm going to explain it, it could even go up to 30 euros, so an extra £5 to £25 if you pay in sterling. I know people are going to get angry at that, but hear me out. This is the only way I believe that they could actually justify a price like this, and it needs to be done at least as close to this as possible for them to be able to justify a pricing. Like I said before, it's not about the price, it's about the value of the actual thing. Naturally, again, we all feel a little bit let down with Shadows of Change, and they need to work around that. So the way I'm envisioning it is it would introduce 4 brand new factions. Playable ESTALIA, playable TILEA, playable ARABY, and then a playable Dogs of War faction. Yes, something centralized. I know some people are asking about the Border Princes, but keep in mind that the Border Princes themselves aren't really a faction. It's just people leaving their respective countries to form their own thing. They don't have their unique culture, they don't have their unique armies. It's literally there to be a sandbox. Even Games Workshop has gone out recently with the old world stuff, I think this was last year, saying that the Border Prince territories are there to be a sandbox for players to just kind of make up their own thing. So doubling back, right, we would have 3 unique factions with ARABY, ESTALIA, and TILEA, and then the Dogs of War faction would actually take from all of them, meaning that we'd get a bunch of new units, a literal ton of new units, unlike what Creative Assembly said for Shadows of Change, in a very similar form of the Champions of Chaos. Once again, if you played as one of the Monogod factions, you would only have access to the Monogod units, but if you played as a Chaos Undivided faction, then you'd have access to all the toys. So if something like this happened to the Dogs of War, this would mean that you would actually have a reason to play this DLC at least 4 times, tons of replayability, which would then give you more reason to purchase it, wouldn't it? If there's more stuff to play around with, more playstyles, well, there you go. And this is how their content could easily be done. We'd get 1 Legendary Lord per faction. Again, I'm right now talking about per faction, so ESTALIA, TILEA, and ARABY as its own thing. 2 generic Lord options per faction. This would mean a frontline melee and then obviously a spellcaster, and 2 generic heroes, once again a melee character and a spellcaster. In terms of units, each faction would have 15 reskinned units. This would be stuff we've already got in game, like for example, you know, Empire State Troops, Great Swords, all the usual stuff, but reskinned to look like their own thing, right? Reskinned to look like Arabians, TILEANs, and ESTALIANs. That would be the same also with basic artillery that we know was basically shared throughout all these human nations, cannons and mortars. When you think of ESTALIA or TILEA or ARABY, you'll be thinking of certain troops, but most of them are technically already in game. You know, you've got the Empire Outriders, for example, that with a little bit of a reskin, a retexture here and there, they could easily be ESTALIAN conquistadors, you know, musket men on horses. That's why I'm saying that the rigs and the animations are a key factor here, and then obviously you'd have some unique units for your faction to differentiate you a little bit, because one big problem that I did have with the Champions of Chaos DLC is it only introduced the 1 unique unit, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, it's cool, don't get me wrong, the War Shrine is still one of my favorite units, however, some unique stuff could be added in, and this is how it could be done to differentiate the factions and have a little bit more fun. And then everything would be added to the Dogs of War faction, right? And we'll talk about each of the factions individually a little bit later on, but this means that you would have everything barring the Legendary Lords and the Lord options and Hero options. Instead, you'd have your own stuff, unless they have some form of unique confederation mechanic which would allow you to take all the Legendary Lord options. Creative Assembly really need to start thinking about implementing better ways to confederate, as it's very noticeable when it comes into game and you're trying to just catch them all like Pokemon. Now, before we jump into the factions individually, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Obviously, these territories are not represented in the Realm of Chaos campaign, and I know a lot of people are saying, oh, just put them in Marienburg and so on, but no, this wouldn't work too well. I think the best thing to do here with a Dogs of War faction is just do it for Immortal Empires and Immortal Empires alone. I know Creative Assembly have gone on record saying that they've got no plans to do this, but first up, they've lied before, they continue to lie in certain things, and secondly, the dev time doesn't need to be wasted on the Realm of Chaos campaign. It's actually a fairly good example if you look towards the Changeling, who has much more of his story-based mechanic and his mechanic in general in the Immortal Empires than he does in the Realm of Chaos. While I do agree that yes, sometimes it could be implemented in the Realm Realm of Chaos stuff too. But yeah, if all the story is being put into the Immortal Empires also, there is literally no need to have it in both, especially for a faction that's not represented. Have them all in the Immortal Empires, and this means that we could have a faction in ESTALIA, we could have a faction in TILEA, we could have a faction in ARABY, there's a big blank spot over there, and then finally have a faction maybe in the New World Colonies, have them start off differently, that's where the Dogs of War could easily be, or have a dual start for one of the ESTALIAN factions, or whatever, you know? So let's start looking towards all the factions individually, and we're going to start off with TILEA, because I feel like this one is going to be the easiest to talk about. There's obviously been a leak, which has mentioned the Lady Belladonna and Bertsche the Besieger. Now what's going to happen here is we're going to actually ignore Lady Belladonna until later on in this video. Trust me on this, I have a really good idea on how she could be implemented, but we'll start off with TILEA. So Bertsche the Besieger would be the legendary lord for TILEA. He is actually quite popular since he is the grandfather of all siege warfare. This guy is the expert. While he's naturally been dead in lore for quite some time now, it just kind of makes sense to bring him forward. It's stuff like Rapans, Vlad, and so on. It's perfectly fine. Then we'd have two lord options, a frontline fighter and a spellcaster. Give them some generic laws, they don't really need their own unique laws of magic, and there you go. Same thing would be done with the hero choices, a melee hero and a spellcaster, again with variety of lore, because variety is actually quite important here, right? To make sure that the melee lord and the melee hero are used enough, make them in a similar way to the Lord Magistrate, where they're also kind of buffer troops, and there you go. They'll be valid for you throughout the whole of your campaign. Then the usual around 12 basic units. These would be the reskinned ones. You'd have a few different varieties, so there could be a few more, but you know, like state troops, archers, crossbows, knights on foot. Get the very basic of the Empire and Bretonnian factions and just reskin them. Obviously not including anything like, say, for example, demigryphs or Bretonnian knights, hippogriffs, and stuff like that. This would be the basic units that would fill the foundations of the roster. Since this is TILEA and we know that it's a siege warfare based faction because of Bertsche, make it a unique thing. Give them a bunch of artillery, right? Give them the cannons, give them the Hellblaster volley guns, give them as much artillery as they might need to give it that siege feel. And then the unique units come into play. This is where you would have stuff like the Birdmen of Katraza, something that we know exists in the lore. Give them the Pervase crossbowmen because, I mean, why not? They seem like a very cool unit, and the fact of the matter is, I mean, it's something that you could see in sieges. Add in a proper pikeman unit and there you go. It's pretty much enough. Then obviously there would be some variance there, so you could fluff it out a little bit more, and the 15 basic units could have some extra variance just to be a little bit more fluffed up. Give them a quote-unquote unique mechanic as a workshop. Yeah, literally just taking Icet Claw's workshop and calling it Leonardo's workshop, as Leonardo da Miragliano is a thing in lore, and that way you'll be able to buff up your artillery, your range units, maybe even unlock the ability to get some steam tanks because he is actually the inventor of the steam tank, and there you go. You have something kind of fun while also reusing mechanics in its own way, which is something that Creative Assembly seem keen to do, but making it factionally appropriate, right? Welcome to ESTALIA, gentlemen. Okay, so ESTALIA would work in a very similar way. You'd have a legendary lord. The problem here is that ESTALIA don't really get too pushed up with legendary characters in terms of like lore and so on, but it's not out of the question to make a new character up. If you can spend so much time making Mother Ostankia, not giving her any context whatsoever, well, that's the same thing here. And Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay does have a few ESTALIAN names and ESTALIAN characters that could easily be translated over. It's the same IP, and Creative Assembly have stated that they can use stuff from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so there you go. Then once again, a melee lord and a melee hero, spellcaster lord and a spellcaster hero. In a perfect world, we'd actually not have the spellcasters, and we'd instead have something like a warrior priest of Myrmidia as a lord and a hero, but that would require new modeling and so on, as we know that the warrior priests are mostly female and they fight with spear and shield. That might be a bit too much to ask for when we're trying to get as much content as possible. And plus, let's be honest, like a spellcaster is usually better than a warrior priest. I don't know why, but I just don't like using them too much. The usual thing with the basic units, Get a bunch, 12 to 13 units acquired from Bretonnia and the Empire, reskin them, retexture them, and there you go. They'd be using the same animations anyway, and then add in some unique units. We know in lore, for example, this is a very recent addition, but bull riders are a thing. So yeah, you'd get a knightly order, but riding bulls, and that sounds incredible. That gives you a monstrous cavalry unit. Have some riderless bulls, and maybe a unit of war dogs that eventually could even be used for an Ulrichian style DLC, or maybe that will come sooner than this, and there you go. Naturally then there'd be other unit variants, right? So like heavily armored handgunners to look like conquistadors, all the usual stuff there, but you've got an ESTALIAN roster. In terms of mechanics, rather than reusing something, the ESTALIANs would have something brand new in the form of inquisitorial crusades, right? So this would give you reason to attack certain places, very similar kinda to like the war mechanic, but you wouldn't be getting extra units added to you. Instead, you would declare a crusade on a specific city, just like the war, and you'd get some very strong benefits, right? This is something that also needs to be done for the Bretonians, as, well, yeah, they need a proper crusade mechanic, and you've got the basic framework over there. I know Creative Assembly staff do listen to these videos, some of them have actually told me, hi guys, so there you go, there's the idea. If you like it, use it, please. It's something that the community would love a lot. Now on to ARABY, and this is a faction that I feel very passionate about. It's one that I've always wanted. Creative Assembly have gone on record saying that they don't want to do ARABY, or they've got no plans for it, but I would say that if you're going to do a Dogs of War DLC and you don't include ARABY, that would make me and a lot of others very mad. Why are you excluding the potential fan base that you could get from like the Middle East and so on, especially when everyone else is getting represented? You've got Cathay for China, you've got obviously the Slavic countries for Kislev, Europeans for the Empire, the Brits and the French obviously for the Bretonian faction. Everyone is being represented. People like seeing their cultures represented. But let's not going into that rant anymore. Let's start talking about the possible roster. The elephant in the room is obviously Jafar cannot be a legendary character because, well, you know, Jafar is a name from something else, and it just doesn't really make sense. What you can do is just make up a new character. It's not that difficult. You've done it already in the past, and Games Workshop would likely be able to. Hell, we know in this timeline, the 8th edition timeline, there is an actual new Sultan in charge in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Just doesn't have a name, I believe. So give him a name. There you go, use his lore. Again, usual stuff, melee lord and hero, that would be like a sultan and an emir. We'd have the legendary lord as a grand sultan, and then you would have a spellcaster lord and hero with the appropriate laws of magic, you know, lore of light and stuff like that. As much as I would like a unique lore of magic for ARABY, I'm being realistic here, just saying, yeah, it's better to use the generic color laws rather than getting too much work on one faction and then one feels lopsided. Then the usual stuff of some reskinned units. I imagine that there would be less here because we don't know of Arabians pretty much using crossbows and so on. So let's say around 8 reskinned units, maybe a few more. Obviously, keep in mind that I'm just saying basic. There would be some reskinned variants also included. And then from there, we could start looking towards some proper, actual new units. And I feel like ARABY would need more. Yes, I will admit that there is a little bit of a bias here, but it's also the case that ARABY isn't the same as they do use a few other things, right? So you'd get elephants, because, I mean, why not, right? 2 variants, maybe even an elephant-style unit. Carpets, djinns, and camel riders. Add in their variants there, and yeah, you've got an ARABY army. In terms of the faction mechanic, just give them the Tomb King market stuff. Yeah, I think that's actually pretty good, considering that ARABY is known to be a trader nation. In case some of you don't know, after the Crusades that pretty much decimated ARABY, the nation started rebuilding itself, and it's actually known that they've become quite the traders. Not only do they trade with, say, for example, the Empire, and obviously the nations that they once caused problems to, but also with Cathay, Ind, and so on, which is actually, there's a minor mention that there is a specific pass from the Silk Road all the way to ARABY. Just give them the Tomb King mechanic for trading, maybe give them some caravan mechanics, that would be kind of cool, and there you go. The caravan mechanic is fantastic, and it makes sense to kind of reuse it again. Hopefully more of the version of the Chaos Dwarfs. And then for the Dogs of War faction themselves, why not Marco Colombo, who is a character that we know travels a lot? Put him in the New World colony areas, so obviously in Lustria. Yes, I know, Lustria Ball, but there you go. Have 2 lords, again, spellcaster melee lord, this would be a mercenary general, a mercenary sorcerer lord, and then for the heroes, the same thing. Then just add in a bunch of the units that we already have available through all the factions. The Arabians, the TILEANs, and the ESTALIANs, with maybe a few units extra to be like mercenary swordsmen, mercenary archers, mercenary this, mercenary that, just to give them the feeling that they're actually going out there and doing some stuff. So they'd have access to everything, and then for a unique mechanic, they could have something like the contracts, right? The ogres have some form of contracts, maybe make it a little bit more fleshed out, have it a little bit better, or not only for the Dogs of War, but the ogre kingdoms also, because the contract system is pretty ass, and there you go. You have something unique, you have something fun. Again, reusing mechanics were applicable, but also makes sense for the faction. Now, there's obviously the elephant in the room. There is another character mentioned throughout the game files, which is Belladonna. Now, she could literally be a legendary hero and available to all the factions, because what her lore actually represents is she's a Black Widow. She'll marry a man of repute, eventually kill them off and take their wealth and so on. So it could be done in such a way that she's there, she buffs up your faction, but maybe nerfs your legendary lord if she's in the legendary lord's army. Maybe she'll just actually nerf whatever lord she's with, but she'll buff up troops. I think this kind of works out, and it makes a reason to have her there. I mean, I wouldn't have gone with her, I would have gone with Leonardo personally, but it seems that CA's heart is set on this, if this is still something planned. But yeah, she kind of marries it. The quest chain would be you unlocking her, but your character would be marrying her, and there you go. I mean, I think this kind of works well, and to be honest, I mean, she's cool. I mean, the idea is just to have certain unique characters. She's fairly unique, and she could literally be with all 4 factions. So now we can look towards the Immortal Empires map, and you can see we've got some colors here, right? So I'm going for red for ESTALIA, a lighter red for minor factions. It would literally just maybe be 1 or 2. Then TILEA, we've got blue and a lighter blue for a minor faction. ARABY, we've got a green, mostly because the map doesn't really look too good on yellow. A lighter green for minor factions. And then Dogs of War, which is like the generic Dogs of War, can be found in, we'll go with purple and a lighter purple for minor factions. That already fills out the map really, really well. And you can see I've got some stuff there in the Border Princes too, just to give a little bit more feeling there. It gets rid of the Empire clones, and I think that that's really, really important. I mean, let's be honest, the grand majority of you just want other factions to fight against whilst playing Call Friends, and these guys are pretty central to you, which means that you get a little bit more variety. Variety is very, very important. And my biggest pet peeve of this series, well, other than the recent pricing matters and just weird tactics, is more of the case of, yeah, I don't like seeing Empire clones. Empire clones don't fit in those areas, and we need to have a little bit of variety. Then we also have to talk about Regiments of Renown. So Regiments of Renown are obviously an important thing when it comes to the Dogs of War. The Dogs of War themselves are, well, centered around that, right? So they would still exist as Regiment of Renown units. All of these 4 factions would naturally have access to them because it would make sense for them to be able to recruit them as they level up their legendary lord or other lords. And, you know, sometimes you need these special units as a oh shit moment. Now, considering the fact that they would want to likely make this a bit more expensive, around 30 euros or so, this is my assumption, then they could do something to make sure people actually buy this. Not only with all that content that's already been supplied, but a Regiment of Renown system for mercenaries. So even the Empire, Cafe, Dark Elves, High Elves, all of them would have a new tab where they could go into and recruit these units. They would all be unique looking, they'd all have some abilities and so on, so every faction could do it, and it could be done in the same way as the Dogs of War book in the tabletop, where certain factions would be able to recruit certain Regiments of Renown, but not all of them. And this would give you some variety. It means that every faction in-game would have some benefit, and Creative Assembly could even have some fun with it and create new Regiments of Renown for each of the other factions. Some new Ogres, some Caphayans, some Kizovites, all that type of stuff, because that means that literally everyone in the game would benefit from this, and it would possibly point to extra sales. So this means 4 playable races, technically 3.5, because it would be 3 and then mixing them all together to be 1 mega race, and then a bunch of benefits to everyone else. You see what I'm saying about this? You see how I feel like this should be the way that they implement the Dogs of War, and yeah, it's essentially just Southern Realms, but it's its own thing, and it would separate all the races, all the factions, give you a lot of variety. This would be worth 30 euros, in my honest opinion. For base game, yes, it's quite expensive, but it would have the extra stuff. There could be even extra units, extra different things. I'm going with the most basic of format, and I feel like I would be very happy with this. I don't want the Dogs of War being implemented in the form of a DLC where they act as just basically mercenaries, because that would be fucking atrocious. I'm not paying 25 euros or whatever they want to charge for that for mercenaries. Hell, in all honesty, if they want to do just mercenaries, it should just be a free update, just like Bretonnia was, but I would much rather have 4 different factions to play with that play very uniquely, and that means that you get a lot more fun out of it, right? In my complete and honest opinion, this is the only way that the Dogs of War should be implemented, and I wouldn't take it any other way. Right, with all that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion, because, yeah, I'm honestly... This is all I could think about for the past 2 days when the DLC went live and someone found it in the game files. Literally all I could think of. So yeah, let me know again and let's start a bit of a discussion. I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day. I'm going to have a nap. I'm very tired. I've literally stayed up thinking about this. So I'll see you again. Bye.